الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ما بعد. We stopped last week on the asbab, the reasons for a decrease in iman, things that are weaken our faith, things that weaken our faith. And we said it's two parts, it's two different types of things that weaken our faith, or they come in two different, he broke them down into two categories. I remember. Two categories, remember? Two categories of different things that weaken our faith, right? Some of them are, remember? Some of them are controllable, some of them are not controllable, right? And some of them are asbab al-dakhiliyah, which basically are things that come from us, right? And then some of them are things outside of our control that we don't necessarily have control over. And the first one, the first section, the asbab al-dakhiliyah, are those things that we started with. Hafidhullah. And he said the first one was al-jahl, ignorance, being the reason for a person's faith being weak. Not knowing, not having knowledge, not knowing how to increase their faith is a reason in itself for faith being weak. Right? Because if a person doesn't know how to make their faith stronger, then it remains weak. So ignorance is something that's controllable, meaning a person has the ability to learn. A person has the ability to remove the ignorance from himself or herself by learning. So the first one there you mentioned, Hafidhullah, was al-jahl, ignorance. The second one here that we'll start with today, al-ghafla, which is being negligent or heedless. Being negligent or heedless. فَإِذَا غَفَلَ الْإِنسَانُ عَمَّا خُلِقَ لَهُ ضَعُفَ إِيمَانُهُ. That if a person is heedless and they're negligent about their iman, their faith, not giving it any attention, not paying any attention to the things that will increase their faith or decrease their faith, it's not really a priority to them. They're negligent, heedless. Whatever happens, right? So he said this is a reason for a decrease in faith. Wallahu jalla wa ala dhamma al-ghaflata fi kitabihi wa hadhara ashadda tahdhir min sabil al-ghafilin. And in the Quran, Allah criticized or dispraised this type of mentality, being heedless and negligent about things. And he warned us from being like the people who are negligent in the Quran. وَبَيَّنَ رَبُّنَا فِي كِتَابِهِ أَنَّهَا الصِّفَةُ الْكَافِرِينَ. And he told us in the Quran that from the description of the disbelievers is that they're heedless. So this is not something that is a positive trait or characteristic. Allah said in Surah Yunus, in ayah number 92, وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ النَّاسِ عَنْ آيَاتِنَا لَغَافِلُونَ. He said, indeed, many of the people, when it comes to the ayat of Allah, the verses of Allah, they are negligent and heedless. Negligent and heedless. And this is not something that is praiseworthy. It's not something that is a positive characteristic. This is a criticism for it. Allah said in another ayat, in Surah Al-Rum, in ayat number 7, وقال يعلمون ظاهرا من الحياة الدنيا وهم عن الآخرة هم غافلون. They know about the dunya, but when it comes to the hereafter, that they're heedless. When it comes to the hereafter, they're heedless. But they know about the dunya, they know about this life, and they're, as he said, they're up to speed on the dunya. When it comes to things, worldly things, they know about it. But when it comes to their hereafter, then they are heedless or negligent, right? It's not that important. It's not that important to them. Whatever happens, happens, right? They don't give any attention to, will this place that I'm going to affect my iman, right? Will this person that I take as a friend increase my iman or decrease my iman? When I talk to this person, does it affect my iman or not? Marrying this type of person, knowing the type of person they are, a woman, sister, or brother, whatever, if I marry them, are they going to help me as a Muslim? Or is it going to hurt me as a Muslim? Is it going to help my faith or is it going to hurt my faith? But that has to be on a person's mind to be even thinking about those things that could affect them or not. The person that is ghafil, none of that is on their minds. It's not part of their train of thought. He says, فَالْغَفْلَةُ وَهِيَ السَّهْوُ يَعْتَرِي الْإِنسَانِ. It's a type of forgetfulness that overcomes a person. Just negligent. I wasn't even paying attention. Right? Like we said, I wasn't even paying attention. But it's dangerous because if we're not paying attention to the things that's going to help us in iman, help our iman, then it's possible we go to places, we say things, we do things, we take people as close friends, and it might decrease our iman. It might weaken us if we're not paying attention. So after ignorance, al-ghafla, heedlessness, and not paying attention to our surroundings, not paying attention to our iman, not paying attention to what is a benefit to me and what's not a benefit to me, or what's a benefit to my faith, because it might be a benefit. If we say what's a benefit, it might be a benefit as far as money is concerned, right? So it might be a benefit as far as money, but as far as iman, the faith, it might not be a benefit. Right? It could weaken a person's faith, but you made the money, right? Or marrying a sister, or a sister marrying their brother, right? Sister might have status or whatever the case, or the brother might be known for whatever the case is. But it might not be good for his iman. She might not be good for his iman. It's possible. But you might get the benefit of something else. That you marry Fulan, who is this, and he knows this, and he has this much money, and people know him for this. Or you married this sister, and she's known for this, and she's a good... But it might not be good for your iman. It doesn't necessitate that she's a good fit for you, and it doesn't necessitate that he's a good fit for her as far as Islam, iman. But they still might get the benefit that they were looking at on the outside. You with me? On the outside, you marry Fulan, and now, whatever it is that a person's looking for. But that doesn't necessitate that it's beneficial for their faith. So he says that when a person is negligent, da'un, he said it's a type of sickness, khatir, it's a serious sickness, he describes it as. يصيب الإنسان ويبعده عن ذكر الله. When a person is overtaken by this heedlessness or negligence, it pushes them away from the dhikr of Allah. It pushes them further away from the dhikr of Allah Jalla wa'ala. وعن امتثال أمر الله. And from following the commandments of Allah Jalla wa'ala. As a person that's heedless, they're not thinking about, it's pretty much go with the flow. Right? Pretty much just go with the flow. So go here, Ride with me here. It'll shoot with me here real quick. All right. Where you going? I mean, you know, if you're concerned about being in places that could have a negative effect on your faith, if you're worried about being concerned, if you're concerned about being in places that could weaken you as a Muslim, then you got to ask questions. Where you going? Take a ride where? Especially if we know, you know, if we know people that they may not be on the same page that we're on, right? We may not be on the same page Islamically. We're not saying they're not Muslims. We're not saying we're better than somebody else, but everybody's at different places in life. So if we know that that person is not, if we're not on the same page and they tell you, you know, come through, such and such is going on, or come take a ride, we gotta be concerned. Wait a minute. I know where you are with yours, so what's going on really? Before I get there, and now I put myself in a predicament where, right, I'm harming myself. So he says this type of ghafla, this heedlessness, يُبْعِدُهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. It pushes a person further away from the dhikr of Allah, from the remembrance of Allah.
Does that extend as far as even to like speech, conversation?
Conversation too, yeah.
Like if you know this conversation, usually, you know, they're Muslim, but
right.
when you get on the phone with this person, they usually try to go somewhere else. And you
exactly.
might be trying to share your stuff
exactly.
and kind of pull it back, but it always seems, so, I mean, do you start avoiding that conversation, or do you just continue to try to steer it to the right when they try to go left?
You definitely want to steer it to the right if they trying to go left. You might not want to cut them, but every situation is going to be different because, I mean, if they keep going left, then that means they need somebody to pull them right. So you don't want to leave them to go totally left by cutting them, unless it just gets to the point where it's out of your reach and you don't want to harm yourself. But every case is going to be different. How far left are they going? If you can redirect the conversation, you need to redirect the conversation. If you got to cut the conversation short so they can get to the point and then, you know, be done with it. But it is not restricted to going places, conversations, dealing with people, anything in general that's going to weaken us or put us in a position where we may have to compromise the strength of our iman. We may have to compromise our faith. And we want to try to avoid those situations, whether it's a conversation or whatever the case may be. So he says, al-ghafla, the second one, after ignorance, which are two things that he mentioned from the asbab al-dakhiliyya. They're both two things that we can fix, right? That we have the ability to fix. If we're ignorant, if we don't know something, we have the ability to sit down and learn it. The tawfiq of Allah. If we're heedless, then we know I gotta start paying attention. It's something that I can do to say, all right, I need to start doing this more. Somebody might tell you, you gotta start paying attention, you need to do this. You can listen and say, oh yeah, you're right, and fix it. So it's something that's within our range, within our scope as people, as individuals to fix, being heedless. And he mentions, Shaykh Abdul Razak, Hafidhullah, I think 6 things, 6 reasons for the decrease in iman that we do have control over. He says, number 3, al-i'rab. Al-i'rab, which is turning away from the dhikr. And this is a mushkila, turning away from the remembrance of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Right? And Allah said in Surah Al-Sajda, Ayat 22, قال تعالى ومن أظلم ممن ذكر بآيات ربه ثم أعرض عنها إنا من المجرمين منتقمون. Allah said, who is more oppressive or who is more incorrect on a khata? Who is more incorrect than the person? The person who hears the dhikr, they hear the reminder. Somebody reminds them of an ayah in the Quran, or reminds them of the hadith, or reminds them of the statement of right? They hear the reminder. Allah said, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ ذُكِّرَ بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِ ثُمَّ أَعْرَضَ عَنْهَا. After hearing the reminder, they turn away like they never heard it. Right? Who's more oppressive on their own self than this person? Who's more incorrect than a person like this? Meaning they hear the truth. And after hearing the truth, they do what? Turn away like they didn't hear it. How does that look? We might say, man, who does that? Right? But a situation happens, we remind one another as a deen and nasiha, the religion is advice. So when a person hears the advice, sometimes when we hear this, they say, man, I ain't trying to hear all that. Right? Come on, Allah told us we're supposed to do this. I ain't trying to hear all that right now. Right? I ain't trying to hear it. Like, that's not now. Right? People know. You tell them, you bring it to them. They might be angry, upset, but the point is, when the reminder comes, we have to submit. We have to submit to the dhikr, to the ayat of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And that's dangerous, especially when we're talking about somebody bringing an ayat from the Quran, a statement of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and we turn and we say, or we don't say anything, but we take the behavior shows, we just ignore it. Right? And sometimes it's close personal situations. Sometimes it gets close in personal situations where, okay, it's only me and you talking. Right? We discussing the issue. We know it's only us two. Right? You remind me or I remind you. And we know body language and the look on your face says, nah, not now. Right? It's dangerous. Al-i'rad. So it says, فَالْإِعْرَاض عَمَّا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى بِهِ مِنْ صِفَةِ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. Because Allah described those people as, a little translation is criminals. Janima, a person who does a janima. They've committed a serious crime by turning away from the ayat of Allah, the verses of Allah, doing the opposite. After hearing them, this is a serious janima, crime. What did he mean? Number one, of knowing the truth and not acting upon it. In itself is an issue. That's a problem in itself. That comes throughout as another hadith that I like to read a lot. Al-Quran, hujjatan lak or alayk. That the Quran is either going to be a hujjah lak or a hujjah alayk, a proof for you or a proof against you. Right? The ulama say if you use and implement the Quran, then Yawm al-Qiyamah is a proof for us. If we don't implement the Quran, then Yawm al-Qiyamah, the Quran is a proof against us. The Quran is hidayah, it's guidance in the Quran. So if we just decorating our houses with Qurans and, decorating the walls with verses, we're not talking about the permissibility of it. We're talking about the point that we're using it for that. If we're not using it, it's written on our clothes, but we're not using it. If we're doing all of that and we're not using it, then it could be a proof against us. As we know the ayat, we know what it says, we know what it means, but we do the opposite or we don't implement it, then it could be a proof against us, Yawm al-Qiyamah. So, Allah described these people who turned away from the dhikr as being criminals. They committed a major crime by turning away from the dhikr of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And Allah said about them that He will take retribution from them Yawm al-Qiyamah. قال Shaykh Abdul Razak says فلا ينبغي لعبد عندما يسمع كلام الله أو يسمع حديث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن يعرض عنه. So it's not befitting and it's not appropriate that a person hears the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala and then they turn away and act like they never heard it. Right? And it's not appropriate that a person hears the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They hear the hadith, and then they turn away as if they never heard the hadith. They act in opposition. They do the opposite of the ayat, or they do the opposite of what the Prophet ﷺ taught us in the hadith. And this is dangerous, 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 dangerous. And that's why he brought it as the third reason for decrease, a person's faith decreasing, is that a person hears the dhikr, meaning they know the truth, and this is what Allah commands in the Quran, for that kid. So remind one another, because the reminder benefits the believer. So a person reminds his brother, or she reminds her sister, or a person reminds another Muslim of something, and that Muslim turns away and acts like they never heard it. Act like they never heard of it. Whether it's an ayah or hadith. It says if they hear the kalam Allah, the Quran, or if they hear the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, that they turn away. They turn away your rida. That this is a reason for a decrease in faith. A decrease in faith. قال بل الواجب أن يقبل على طاعة الله امتثاله واتباعه. But what is obligatory, what we have to do, the obligation on all of us, not some of us, on all of us, is that we rush to the obedience of Allah Jalla wa'ala, and that should be from our, as we say, our makeup, is that we want to strive. And it takes time, it's not overnight, but it has to be a conscious effort to do the things that will help us get stronger, and a conscious effort to stay away from things that are going to make us weaker. And that's part of al-ghafla, that's part of not being heedless, is that we're paying attention, to our surroundings, and we're not just going with the wind blowing. Wherever the wind blows us, we go, or whatever the conversation takes us, we just flow with it. But it has to be a line drawn at some point. It has to be a line drawn at some point where we stop. But if we're not thinking about that, then we just going with the flow, and it could end up harming us. It says number 4, an-nisyan. The next reason for faith being weakened is an-nisyan, forgetting. فإذا نسي العبد ما أمر به ضعف إيمانه. If a person forgets what they've been commanded to do, they can forget about the command. What did Allah command us to do? And they forget, then their iman becomes weaker. You with me? A person forgets, and all of this all of this is revolving around a person being conscious of what's going on. Being conscious of, what am I supposed to be doing? The Muslim prays. We're commanded to pray. We have to pray 5 times a day. That means my day is based on me knowing throughout the day I have to stop what I'm doing and I have to pray. When I leave out the house in the morning, I understand this, right? I make a conscious effort to fit 5 prayers in my day, no matter what's going on. Then I have to think about that, though, right? After a while, it may become like, okay, it's not, you don't even have to think about it, but at some point, depending on the person has to think, and they have to remind themselves, all right, what time is dhuhr? I know I got to pray dhuhr. I have to think about it. Where am I going to be at 12:15, 1 o'clock, right? Okay, they said the training is from 12 to 4. Well, if the training for the job is from 12 to 4, I have to think, well, dhuhr, I have to pray at 1, for example. So now I have to plan where I'm going to pray at. If I'm in training, I'm going to have to go, and I'm going to have to say, excuse me, I need about 10 minutes, whatever the case may be. And if it's in the wintertime, then that 12 to 4 might cover dhuhr and asr. So when I know I'm going to training from 12 to 4 for a job, I got to figure, I have to be thinking, okay, from 12 to 4, then it's possible I'll be there around for dhuhr and asr. So I have to plan my day to pray dhuhr and asr while I'm at training, or whatever the case may be. It takes, planning and thinking and being conscious of, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? What do I have to do? If I'm not worried about that, if that's not a concern, then I put myself in a position where I could weaken myself as a Muslim, being put myself in a position to weaken myself. Here he says that forgetting the obligations, if you forget your obligations, forgetting the obligations is a reason for decrease in Iman. So this nisyan, this forgetting is two types of forgetfulness, two types of forgetting. Anybody know? Forgetting is broken into two types, two categories. That this reason here is a reason that a person's faith is weak based on forgetting. But it's two types of forgetting. Huh?
Forgetting on purpose, like purposely.
Jade. That's one type. The other type.
Like being distracted.
One type of forgetting, which is the second one. Which is actually the first one, that you forget intentionally. It's an intentional situation where a person there's no excuse for him, as he describes it. نسيان لا يعذر فيه الإنسان وهو ما كان أصله عن تعمد منه. A person, this type of forgetting that a person is not excused. There's no excuse for this type of forgetting, a person forgetting this. Some things are not excusable. You don't have an excuse for it. It says, وَهُوَ مَا كَانَ أَصْلُهُ عَنْ تَعَمُّدٍ مِّنْهُ. And the origin of this type of forgetting, that they wanted to forget. They didn't want to be reminded about it. They didn't want to know about it anyway. Right? So, I forgot. Right? They didn't want to remember anyway. So that type of forgetting is not excused. Right? It says, وَمِنْ هَذَا نَوْ and this is why Allah says in the Quran in Surah Al-Hashr, ayah number 19. Allah said, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. And don't be like those who forgot about Allah. So Allah calls them to forget about their own selves in Surah Al-Hashr, ayah number 19. That the asl is that they didn't want to remember. They didn't want to be reminded. Right? So the intent was to forget about the dhikr, to forget about Allah Jalla wa Ala. Because, what? I want to do this today, or, I want to use those terms, but this weekend, this weekend is the weekend. Oh, Allah forgive us, man, protect us. But we say, a person says, we turning up this weekend, right? Stuff said all the time. Muslim, no, you know better. But this weekend, all that's out the window. You forget about all that, right? And we're going to do this for the weekend, and then Monday, we go back to work like nothing ever happened. Dangerous. Allah says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ. Don't be like those who forgot Allah, so Allah caused them to forget their own selves. In Surah Al-Hashr. So this type of forgetting, the asl is that they didn't want to remember anyway. Not that they didn't know, they didn't want to. They didn't want to be reminded. That's the first type, that they forgot intentionally. The second type is the opposite. That they forgot, but it wasn't intentional. The person literally forgot. You with me? Huh? It says, يُعْذَرُ فِيهِ الْإِنسَانِ. This is a person has an excuse in this case. A person forgets, they have an excuse for forgetting. وَهُوَ مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ أَنْ تَعَمُّدٍ مِّنْهُ. It's the opposite of the first one. That it's not something that somebody intentionally did. As Allah said in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 286. Well, Allah said, the ayah says, قال الله تعالى, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. The dua, which is the dua. O our Lord, O Allah, لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا. Please don't hold us accountable. Don't punish us for what we did out of forgetfulness. Right? Or our mistakes. Don't punish us for forgetting or falling into a mistake. This forgetting is an unintentional forgetting. A person who forgot. Right? Which is possible, as the class the other night was on the Salat class. Sujood as-sahw. Forgetting. You might forget in the Salat. It's not intentional. We know if it's intentional. If a person intentionally does something, right, that's one issue in the Salat. But a person unintentionally, they lost track, they forgot. And then for Fajr, which is 2 rak'ah, they stood up to pray a 3rd rak'ah unintentionally, right? They can fix that. But that type of forgetting is not intentional. And that's why the ayah says, لا تؤاخذنا ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. In Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 286. طيب. The last one we'll do today, فعل المعاصي والارتكاب الذنوب. فعل المعاصي والارتكاب الذنوب. Disobedience, disobeying Allah Jalla wa Ala. Embarking upon sins, sinning, which is an issue, that we have to deal with. No, we're not perfect, but at no point in time has Islam encouraged us to look at sins and belittle sins and disobedience as if it's a small thing. فكما أن الإيمان يزيد بالطاعة فهو ينقص بالمعصية. The same way that Iman increases with obedience to Allah, it decreases and it weakens with disobedience. وأنواع المعاصي كثيرة. We know there's many types of disobedience. Some forms of disobedience are higher and stronger than others. There's different levels of sins, right? 2 categories of sins that we know are what? All sins on the same level? Or some stronger than others? The strongest ones are what? What's the category of the strongest? Or the strongest type of sin, if we can say that? If I say the word, I'll give it away. That's shirk. Type shirk is from that category. But what's the category that it's in? Because there's other things.
Major.
Yeah, the major sins. Shirk is from the major sins, right? The major sins, and shirk is from the major sins. And it's not a thing of major meaning. If we got major sins, and then the second category, minor sins. But not minor, not minor meaning it ain't no big deal. Not that type of minor. Minor meaning the punishment, as far as punishment is connected. How do we know something is a major sin? There's certain wordings in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that let us know that something is a major sin, or in the ayah that we know it's a major sin, right? In the other sins, they don't have those wordings. So the ulama say that it breaks down into major and minor, and there's some different ways to know a major sin from a minor sin. But all sins, that they affect the person's iman. And that's why Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah, Imam al-Dhahabi has a book called Al-Kaba'ir, the major sins. The major sins. It's not really that long either. And Shaykh Abdul Razak, Hafidhullah, he explained it, and he said that every Muslim should at least read the table of contents of the book Al-Kaba'ir. Al-Kaba'ir. Just read the table of contents, at least. You should read the whole book. But a person should at least read through the table of contents so that they get an idea of what the major sins are. And what's the benefit of knowing the major sins? To avoid them. To avoid them, and stay away from them. So he said that every Muslim should at least read the table of contents in the major sins so that they can stay away from them. And of course, reading the book in itself is better. There you go. Table of contents. I mean, a lot of times when we buy books, you don't just go in there. When we were going to the bookstore, just thought about that. We go into the book, we'd be in a bookstore maybe for like, sometimes you'd be in there an hour. You might not even buy, you might buy one book. You might be in there, they call the adhan, they close, you gotta come back after the adhan. Because unless you know what you're getting, you go in there, you gotta read through the table of contents, then they, let me check that out. Because Table of contents. Table of contents is a lot of benefit. He said you should read through the table of contents. That was in Ajaziyah. Tibat al-Asadi. He said you should at least read through the table of contents to familiarize yourself with the major sins, if not being able to study and read the whole book. So the two categories, the major sins and the minor sins. He says, وَلِهَذَا يَنْبَغِي عَلَى الْعَبْدِ أَيْضًا أَنْ يَعْرِفَ حَجْمَ الْمَعَاصِي. That a person should also know, if they committed a sin, what sin, where, like what category does that fall into? Like he says, so we can stay away from them. And some of the sins have threats connected to them in the hereafter. Right? Not all, but some. Some of them have serious threats. The point being, in order to stay away from them. We can stop there, inshallah. But here he mentioned, this last hadith, he mentioned the hadith, وَقَدْ ثَبَتَ عَنَّ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وسلم إِنَّ الْعَبْدَ إِذَا أَخْطَأَ خَطِيئَةً نُكِتَتْ فِي قَلْبِهِ نُكْتَةٌ سَوْدَاء. That if a person commits a sin, this hadith said that if a person commits a sin, then his heart is affected. His heart is affected with a black dot, nukta soda. It shows that sins affect us. Without even going through the rest of the hadith, that sins, disobedience to Allah Jalla wa Ala, it affects our hearts. It's not something that, it's just a flyby, it ain't no big deal. Another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that the believer sees his sins like a mountain get ready to fall on top of him and crush him. The believer sees his sins like a mountain get ready to fall on top of him and crush him. But then you got other people that they see a sin like a fly in front of their face, just like, it ain't no big deal like that. So the Prophet ﷺ told us this in hadith, that the sins affect the heart, that when a person makes a mistake, that a black dot goes on their heart, which means it's encouraged, we got to try to stay away from sins. Not enough is perfect, of course, but we have to try to stay away from disobeying Allah Jalla wa Ala in this difficult situation and type of time we living in, the type of society we living in, the type of things that we're used to, that sometimes sin becomes the norm. Because it's the norm with some people, we get used to seeing the norm, it becomes normal, which affects us. Sometimes we know it's affecting us, sometimes we don't know. But it definitely affects our hearts. Ask Allah Jalla wa Ala salam and afiyah. We'll stop there until next week, inshallah. Any questions?
If someone came to you with a hadith, right? Mm-hmm. And it was something that was recommended, not something that was wajib. Mm-hmm. And you said, alhamdulillah, brother, but you didn't, do, like, if somebody came to you and said, listen, you're supposed to be doing this.
Right.
And it's something that's, recommended. And you left it off.
Mm-hmm.
Would that fall into, like, iqra'?
Al-i'rad. A recommended act is an act that is not, you're not punished for leaving it off. There's no punishment for leaving off something that's recommended. You lose the reward, right? There's reward in doing it, but there's no punishment. Like an obligatory act. You with me? Something that's obligatory, if you don't do it, there's a punishment for that. You're liable to be punished. You open yourself up, we open ourselves up, and that's from the difference in the definitions, the distinction between wajib and sunnah. Something that is obligatory is a command, and if we don't do it, then we are deserving of punishment. Allah could punish us, or He might choose to forgive us. Right? But we open ourselves up to be punished by leaving off something that is obligatory. Something that is recommended, right? It's not a command, jazm, as they say. Not a command that raises it to the level of being obligatory, which means there's no punishment connected to it if you don't do it. But what you do lose is the reward for doing it. So, al-i'rad and a hadith or something like that recommended. No doubt, turning away from the sunnah or belittling the sunnah is not from Islam. Belittling the sunnah or belittling something recommended is not from Islam. Because we consider i'rad on the same level as turning away from a wajib. We can't put it on the same level as turning away from a wajib. You see the difference? It could be that a person, they might say the same thing, like, I ain't doing all that. I'm not doing it, right? To a recommended act, and they might say the same thing, the same statement regarding a obligatory act, but it's still a difference. Either way, there's no good in it, either way in that type of statement, whether it's recommended or obligatory, but the result from it is a little different because both actions, they're not on the same level. You with me? So it's not that it's okay to say it because it's recommended, which is a sunnah. We say recommended, we mean it's something that's a sunnah, and the person comes and say, no, I ain't doing all that. I'm gonna just stick with this. They lose the ajr. They lose the ajr. Is it like them coming and saying they're not praying dhuhr? It's not like them coming and saying, I'm not praying today, or I'm not fasting Ramadan this year. It's not on the same level, but it could be a form of it. Allahu A'lam. Allahu A'lam. But it's definitely, they're not the same as far as the result from them. And I don't know if you describe a person leaving off and a recommended act as being i'rad. I'm not sure if it's described like that. Allah. خلاص. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.